The grocery store security footage would later show everything, how Officer Travis Wilson's hand moved to his weapon the moment FBI agent Marcus Reynolds walked through those automatic doors. In less than 3 minutes, a decorated federal agent would be on his knees at gunpoint, not for any crime but for the color of his skin. What happened next would strip a badge from a racist cop's chest and ignite a firestorm that would transform an entire police department. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment your city below. I want to know just how far this story of injustice and redemption reaches. The fluorescent lights of Westfield Grocery hummed their familiar tune as Marcus Reynolds pushed through the automatic doors at 7:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening that would change everything. His shoulders ached from 12 hours hunched over case files. His eyes burned from scanning through hundreds of pages of hate crime evidence, and all he wanted was to pick up ingredients for the pasta dinner he'd promised himself after wrapping up another grueling day at the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Marcus had spent the better part of his 43 years learning to navigate spaces where his presence might be questioned. Stanford Law Quantico training, 15 years with the Bureau, none of it mattered when someone saw only the color of his skin. But tonight, he was too tired to think about any of that. Tonight, he just wanted his grandmother's recipe for carbonara and maybe a decent bottle of wine. The store was nearly empty, that peaceful lull between the after-work rush and the late-night stragglers. Marcus grabbed a basket, his tailored charcoal suit perhaps a bit too formal for grocery shopping, but he'd come straight from the Federal Building downtown. His Italian leather shoes clicked softly against the polished linoleum as he made his way to the pasta aisle. "Excuse me, sir." The voice came from behind him, sharp and authoritative. Marcus turned slowly, his trained instincts already cataloging details before his conscious mind caught up. Young white male, early 30s, roughly 6 feet tall, athletic build, uniform Milfield Police Department, badge number 4782, hand resting on his service weapon stance, aggressive pupils slightly dilated, adrenaline already pumping. "Can I help you, officer?" Marcus kept his voice calm, neutral. He'd been through this dance before. Officer Travis Wilson's eyes narrowed as he took in Marcus's appearance. The expensive suit, the confident posture, the steady gaze that didn't immediately drop in deference. "What are you doing here? Shopping for dinner?" Marcus gestured to his basket, which contained a package of pancetta fresh parmesan and a box of linguine. "Is there a problem? Don't get smart with me." Wilson's hand tightened on his weapon. "This is a nice neighborhood. We don't usually see people like you shopping here." People like you. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt the familiar burn of indignation rise in his chest, but he pushed it down with practiced ease. "I live 3 blocks away, officer. I shop here twice a week." "Sure you do." Wilson's voice dripped with skepticism. "Got any ID on you?" Marcus reached slowly for his wallet, making sure his movements were deliberate and non-threatening. As he pulled it out, his FBI credentials were visible for just a moment before he extracted his driver's license. "I asked for ID, not your whole wallet. What else you got in there?" Wilson stepped closer, his body language increasingly aggressive. "Officer, I'm happy to show you my identification, but I need to understand what crime you suspect me of committing." Marcus's voice remained steady, professional. "Crime? Who said anything about a crime unless you've got something to hide?" Wilson's free hand moved to his radio. "I'm going to need backup at Westfield Grocery. Got a suspicious individual, possible 1054. 1054, possible dead body." Marcus knew the code was completely inappropriate for the situation, designed to escalate, to bring more officers running. "Officer Wilson," Marcus read the nameplate clearly. "I can see your badge number. This interaction is being recorded by the store's security cameras. I strongly suggest, are you threatening me? Wilson's weapon was out of its holster now, not quite pointed at Marcus, but ready. Turn around. Hands where I can see them. The few other shoppers in the store had stopped frozen in place. An elderly woman near the dairy section had her phone out recording. A young couple with a toddler quickly headed for the exit. The teenage cashier looked terrified, unsure whether to call management or hide. "Officer, I'm a federal agent," Marcus said clearly, loudly enough for the witnesses to hear. "My credentials are in my wallet. FBI. Special Agent Marcus Reynolds, Civil Rights Division." "Bullshit." Wilson's laugh was harsh, disbelieving. "You think I'm stupid FBI agent doing grocery shopping in a suit? Nice try. Turn around now." Marcus could see the situation spiraling. Wilson was too keyed up, too deep in his own narrative to listen to reason. The smart play was compliance de-escalation sorted out later with lawyers and complaints. But Marcus was tired of always being the one to bend, tired of swallowing his dignity for someone else's comfort, tired of pretending this was anything other than what it was. "I'm going to reach very slowly for my credentials," Marcus announced, his voice carrying throughout the store. "They're in my inside jacket pocket. Don't you fucking move." Wilson's gun was up now, aimed directly at Marcus's chest. "On your knees, oh." Time seemed to slow. Marcus could hear his heart beating steady and strong. He could smell the fresh bread from the bakery section, the faint scent of floor cleaner Wilson's cologne, something cheap and aggressive. He could see the fear in the young officer's eyes, the fear that made him dangerous, the fear that had killed so many who looked like Marcus. "Officer Wilson." Marcus spoke slowly, clearly. "I am Special Agent Marcus Reynolds with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Badge number 7829. I am going to comply with your orders, but this is a mistake that will end your career. On your knees." Marcus set down his basket carefully and lowered himself to his knees, his hands visible and still. The cold of the linoleum seeped through his suit pants. His dignity screamed against the position, but his training kept him calm. Stay alive now, seek justice later. Wilson moved behind him, gun still drawn. "Hands behind your back." The cuffs were too tight, biting into Marcus's wrists. Wilson's hands were shaking as he secured them, his breathing rapid and shallow. The officer was scared, Marcus realized, but not of him, scared of being wrong, scared of the cameras, scared of the black man in the expensive suit who didn't cower the way he was supposed to. "Check my credentials," Marcus said, his cheek now pressed against the floor as Wilson pushed him down. "Inside jacket pocket, FBI. Check them now before this gets worse." "Shut up." But Wilson's voice had lost some of its edge. He reached into Marcus's jacket, pulled out the leather credential case. His face went pale as he opened it, saw the gold badge, the official ID with Marcus's photo, and the FBI seal. "Oh shit," someone whispered. The elderly woman with the phone had moved closer, still recording. It's fake," Wilson stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Has to be fake." "Call it in," Marcus said from the floor. "Run my badge number. Call the federal building. Do something other than keeping a federal agent on the ground in handcuffs." Wilson seemed frozen, caught between his certainty that he was right and the growing realization that he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life. The badge felt real, looked real, but admitting that meant admitting he'd pulled his gun on an FBI agent for shopping while black. Even if you are FBI," Wilson started grasping for justification. "You were acting suspicious, failed to comply immediately. I had reasonable suspicion." "Of what?" Marcus's voice cut through the excuse. "What crime? Shopping for pasta, wearing a suit, existing in your neighborhood?" More people had gathered now, a small crowd of witnesses. Someone was live streaming. The teenage cashier had finally called the manager, who stood at the customer service desk, phone in hand, clearly calling someone higher up the chain. "You need to stop talking," Wilson warned, but his authority was crumbling. "No, Officer Wilson, you need to start thinking," Marcus replied. "You have two choices right now. You can uncuff me, apologize, and hope I'm feeling generous when I file my report. Or you can keep me here, and we can wait for your chief to arrive. Because I guarantee you, someone has already called this in. Your dispatch knows by now, the FBI knows by now, and Chief Jackson definitely knows by now." Wilson's face went white at the mention of Chief Jackson. Robert Jackson was new to Milfield, brought in specifically to reform a department plagued by complaints of racial profiling and excessive force. He had a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to civil rights violations. You know the chief." Marcus almost smiled. "Call him. Tell him Marcus Reynolds is on the ground in handcuffs at Westfield Grocery. See what he says." Wilson's radio crackled to life before he could respond. "Unit 47, what's your 20T-ont? Westfield Grocery." Wilson responded, his voice uncertain now. "Chief Jackson is en route. ETA 2 minutes. He says, and I quote, 'Nobody moves, nobody leaves, and if Agent Reynolds has a single scratch on him, badges will roll. Confirm you copy.'" Wilson's hand holding the radio began to tremble visibly. I copy." The store had gone completely silent, except for the hum of the freezers and the distant sound of sirens growing closer. Marcus remained still on the ground, professional even in his humiliation, but inside a small spark of satisfaction began to grow. Travis Wilson had no idea what was coming, but Marcus did. He and Robert Jackson went way back to childhood summers in Birmingham, back to promises made about changing the system from the inside back, to a friendship forged in the fires of the civil rights movement their parents had fought in. "Officer Wilson," Marcus said quietly, "you might want to start thinking about how you're going to explain this. Because in about 90 seconds, you're going to have to look Chief Jackson in the eye and justify why you have his best friend from childhood face down on a grocery store floor." Wilson made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. His hand moved toward the cuff keys, then stopped. He was trapped. Releasing Marcus now would be admitting guilt, but keeping him restrained when the chief arrived would be even worse. The sirens were loud now, multiple vehicles. Not just the chief, then this was becoming a scene. Through the store's front windows, the flashing lights painted everything in alternating red and blue. "Last chance," Marcus offered. "Uncuff me now and maybe we can minimize the damage." I was following protocol," Wilson insisted weakly. "You fit the description of what? There's no bolo out. No recent crimes in the area. You haven't mentioned any specific suspect description, so what exactly did I fit?" Wilson couldn't answer because they both knew the truth. Marcus fit the description that existed only in Wilson's mind, the description of someone who didn't belong, someone who must be up to something, as someone whose very presence in a nice neighborhood was suspicious. The front doors burst open. Chief Robert Jackson strode in, and even from his position on the floor, Marcus could feel the fury radiating from his old friend. Robert had aged well in the 25 years since they'd graduated college together. His hair was silver now, but he still carried himself like the linebacker he'd been at Alabama State. His dress uniform was immaculate, his chief's stars catching the fluorescent lights. Behind him came 2 other officers, their body cameras clearly active, and what looked like someone from internal affairs. Robert's eyes found Marcus on the floor, took in the cuffs, the position, the humiliation of it all. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek, a tell Marcus remembered from when they were kids, the sign that Robert was about to explode, but was keeping it controlled. "Officer Wilson." Robert's voice was deadly quiet, which anyone who knew him understood was far more dangerous than yelling. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why Special Agent Marcus Reynolds is on the floor in handcuffs. Chief, he was acting suspicious, and when I approached— Suspicious how? Robert cut him off. Be specific. He was shopping, but he looked— his suit and the way he was acting. You detained a federal agent for shopping in a suit. Robert's voice dropped another octave. Is that what you're telling me? I didn't know he was FBI. He didn't immediately identify himself, and when someone doesn't comply— Stop. Robert held up a hand. Officer Martinez, please ask the store manager to provide all security footage from the last 30 minutes. Officer Chen, collect witness statements from everyone present. Start with the lady who's been recording. He gestured to the elderly woman who nodded approvingly. Chief, I followed protocol. Wilson started again. Protocol. Robert's control finally cracked, his voice rising. Show me the protocol that says you draw your weapon on an unarmed man shopping for groceries. Show me the protocol that says you cuff a federal agent after he's identified himself. Show me the protocol that says you keep him on the floor like a damn animal even after you've seen his credentials. He could have had a fake badge, but he didn't, did he? Robert stepped closer to Wilson, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. He doesn't. That's Special Agent Marcus Reynolds, 15-year veteran of the FBI, currently assigned to investigating hate crimes and civil rights violations. Ironic, isn't it? Wilson's face had gone from pale to slightly green. I couldn't have known. Couldn't have known what, that he was FBI, or that he was somebody who mattered. Robert's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Because from where I'm standing, Officer Wilson, it seems like you thought he didn't matter because of the color of his skin, and now you're panicked because you found out he does. I'm not racist, Wilson protested. No. Robert pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment. 3 complaints in the last 18 months, all involving African-American men, all dismissed for lack of evidence. The Turner case where you stopped a black doctor for suspicious behavior while he was checking his mailbox. The Henderson incident where you demanded ID from a black homeowner in his own garage. And now this. Marcus watched from the floor as Wilson's career disintegrated in real time. He could almost feel sorry for the young officer, if his wrists weren't burning from the too tight cuffs, if his dignity wasn't pooled on the linoleum beside him, if this wasn't the 1,000th variation of the same story he'd seen played out across the country. Uncuff him, Robert ordered. Now. Wilson fumbled for his keys, knelt beside Marcus. His hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. The cuffs came off and Marcus slowly pushed himself up, first to his knees, then to his feet. His suit was ruined, dusty, and wrinkled. His wrists bore angry red marks, but he stood tall, dignified, meeting Robert's eyes with a look that conveyed years of shared history and understanding. Marcus, Robert said softly, are you hurt? Nothing that won't heal, Marcus replied, rubbing his wrists. Robert nodded, then turned back to Wilson. Badge and gun, on the counter, now. Chief, you can't. I can, and I am. You're suspended pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs will want to speak with you first thing tomorrow morning. I suggest you contact your union rep and probably a lawyer. Wilson's hands shook as he unclipped his badge, removed his service weapon. The metallic thud as they hit the customer service counter seemed to echo through the store. Several people were still recording, and Marcus knew this moment. A white officer being stripped of his badge for violating a black man's rights would be viral within hours. But I didn't know he was FBI. Wilson tried one more time, desperate. Robert stepped into Wilson's space, close enough that the younger officer had to look up to meet his eyes. Let me make something crystal clear, Officer Wilson. It wouldn't have mattered if he was FBI CEO or unemployed. It wouldn't have mattered if he was in a suit or sweats. What matters is that you saw a black man and immediately assumed criminal. What matters is that you escalated a nothing situation into a potential deadly force encounter. What matters is that you violated every principle of constitutional policing and human decency because of your own prejudice. He paused, letting the words sink in. The only reason you're not under arrest right now is because Agent Reynolds hasn't decided whether to press federal charges. Yet. Wilson looked at Marcus, and for the first time, Marcus saw him really see him not as a threat, not as a suspicious person, but as a human being whose dignity he'd violated, whose life he'd endangered, whose rights he'd trampled. "I'm sorry," Wilson whispered. Marcus studied him for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "You're not sorry. You're scared. There's a difference. Sorry would have come before you knew who I was. Sorry would have come when you saw me as just another black man trying to buy dinner. But you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for the consequences you're facing." The truth of it hung in the air, undeniable. Wilson's shoulders slumped in defeat. "IA will need your statement," Robert told Marcus. "But if you want to go home first, clean up, we can do this tomorrow." Marcus shook his head. "No. Let's do it now, while everything's fresh, while the witnesses are still here." He looked around at the gathered crowd, at the phones still recording. "While everyone can see exactly what happened here." Robert nodded, understanding. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about accountability, about showing the community that things could be different, that justice could prevail. "Mrs. Chen," Robert addressed the elderly woman who'd been recording from the beginning. "Would you be willing to share your footage with Internal Affairs?" "Already sent it to my granddaughter," the woman replied with a fierce smile. "She's a civil rights attorney. She said to tell you she'll have it posted online within the hour, and she's happy to represent Agent Reynolds pro bono if he wants to pursue a civil case." Wilson made a small defeated sound. The next 2 hours were a blur of statements, forms, and procedures. The store manager provided the security footage without being asked twice. 14 witnesses gave statements, all corroborating Marcus's account. The live stream had already been viewed 12,000 times and climbing. As the investigation wrapped up at the scene, Robert pulled Marcus aside. "You could have called me, you know, as soon as this started, and said what, hey Robert, one of your officers is hassling me for shopping, while Black T both know how that would have looked like I was trying to use our friendship to get special treatment." Special treatment? Robert's voice was incredulous. Marcus expecting to shop for groceries without being held at gunpoint isn't special treatment. It's a basic human right. "Tell that to every black man in America," Marcus replied wearily. They stood there for a moment, two successful black men who'd climbed to the heights of law enforcement, both knowing that none of their achievements could fully shield them from moments like this. "This is going to get big," Robert warned. "Once this hits the media, and it will by morning, it's going to be national. FBI agent racial profiling caught on video. It's everything the news cycle loves." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I want to handle it right. This isn't just about me or Wilson. This is about your whole department, about every department. About changing the culture that makes officers like Wilson think they can act this way." Robert nodded slowly. "You want to use this as a catalyst, don't you?" Marcus challenged. "Isn't this why you took this job, to reform the department?" "It is," Robert admitted. "But I was hoping for more time to work from the inside to change things gradually." "Gradually doesn't work when people are dying," Marcus said bluntly. "When kids are getting shot for playing with toy guns, when men are being choked to death for selling cigarettes, when women are being killed in their own homes. Gradual change is a luxury we can't afford." Robert was quiet for a moment, then squared his shoulders. You're right. So what do you want to do? Full transparency, Marcus said immediately. Everything public, the investigation, the findings, the consequences, training reforms, policy changes, accountability measures. And Wilson, he needs to be the example. Not just suspension, not a slap on the wrist. Real consequences. The union will fight it, Robert warned. Let them, Marcus said firmly. I've got the FBI's Civil Rights Division behind me. The ACLU is probably already drafting briefs, and by tomorrow we'll have public opinion on our side. This is the moment, Robert. This is our chance to show that the system can work, that bad cops can be held accountable, that change is possible. As they spoke, Officer Wilson was being escorted out by Internal Affairs, no longer in uniform, his career in law enforcement effectively over. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, just a young man who'd let fear and prejudice guide his actions and was now facing the consequences. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few people lingered approaching Marcus to shake his hand, to apologize for not intervening sooner, to express their outrage and support. The teenage cashier, a young black kid who couldn't have been more than 17, stood nearby, clearly wanting to say something. "What's your name, son?" Marcus asked gently. "Deshaun," the kid replied. "Deshaun Williams. I wanted to say thank you. For staying calm. For showing us how to handle it. My mom always tells me to comply, to not make trouble, but watching you. You complied, but you didn't give up your dignity. You know." Marcus felt a weight settle on his shoulders, the weight of being an example, a role model, whether he'd asked for it or not. Sometimes, Deshaun, compliance is survival. But you're right, we shouldn't have to give up our dignity in the process. Remember what happened here tonight. Remember that you have rights, that your life matters, that you deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of what uniform someone wears. Deshaun nodded solemnly, then surprised Marcus by asking, "Are you going to sue?" "My mom says you should sue the whole department." "I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen to another person," Marcus replied. "Whether that's a lawsuit, federal investigation, or reform measures, whatever creates real change." As the scene finally wound down, Marcus retrieved his abandoned grocery basket, the pasta ingredients still sitting where he'd left them. The carbonara didn't seem appetizing anymore, but he bought the items anyway, a small act of normalcy, in a night that had been anything but normal. Robert walked him to his car. "You know, this is just the beginning," he said. "Tomorrow, when this goes wide, there's going to be pushback. The union, the Back the Blue crowd, people who'll say you should have just shown your ID immediately." "I know," Marcus replied. "There always are. People who think we should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity we're allowed to keep, who think asking for basic respect is somehow asking for too much." "How do you do it?" Robert asked suddenly. "Deal with this every day in your job, seeing the worst of it, and then have it happen to you personally." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Remember what our parents used to say, that we had to be twice as good to get half as far?" "I remember." "Well, they were right and wrong," Marcus continued. "We do have to be twice as good, but not to get half as far to survive the journey. Every degree, every achievement, every success, their armor. Not perfect armor as tonight proved, but armor nonetheless. And that armor gives us the power to fight back, to demand change, to protect others who don't have that same protection." He paused, looking back at the grocery store, where his humiliation had been witnessed by dozens, recorded for millions more to see. What happened tonight was traumatic, degrading, and wrong. But it was also an opportunity. Officer Wilson thought he was confronting a nobody, someone whose complaint would be dismissed, whose word wouldn't matter. Instead, he gave us the perfect case to show exactly how broken the system is and how to fix it. Robert extended his hand, and Marcus clasped it, two friends united in a fight that had started long before them and would continue long after. "Tomorrow morning I'm calling a press conference," Robert said. "Will you stand with me?" "Wouldn't be anywhere else," Marcus confirmed. As he drove home, Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with messages, colleagues from the FBI who'd heard what happened, friends who'd seen the video already circulating on social media, his sister in Atlanta, who was ready to fly out, and in her words, raise holy hell. But the message that stopped him was from an unknown number, a text with a video attached. He pulled over to watch it. It was from inside the store, a different angle from what the elderly woman had captured. This one showed Wilson's face clearly as he'd first seen Marcus, the way his expression had changed from casual observation to suspicion to hostility in the span of seconds. It showed the exact moment Wilson decided Marcus didn't belong before any interaction, before any words were exchanged. It was purely simply the sight of a black man in a nice suit that had triggered everything that followed. The text accompanying it read, "I work at the store. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I was scared. But this is wrong and people need to see it. Thank you for standing up to him. Sarah, the deli counter." Marcus saved the video. It would be crucial evidence, but more than that, it was validation. He hadn't imagined the hostility, hadn't misread the situation. Wilson's prejudice had been immediate and obvious to everyone watching. When he finally made it home to his apartment, Marcus stood in his living room for a moment, still in his ruined suit, processing everything that had happened. On his wall hung his FBI credentials, his law degree photos from his graduation at Quantico, commendations from cases he'd solved. All that achievement, all that success, and he'd still ended up on his knees on a grocery store floor, cuffed like a common criminal because of the color of his skin. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the story would be everywhere. Tomorrow, Officer Wilson would face the consequences of his actions. Tomorrow, Chief Jackson would announce sweeping reforms. Tomorrow, the fight for justice would continue, and Marcus would be at the forefront of it. He finally changed out of his suit, hanging it up carefully, even though it was ruined. It would be evidence, but more than that, it was a reminder that the fight was far from over, that dignity could be attacked, but not destroyed, that justice delayed was not always justice denied. His phone rang, Robert calling. "Just got word from the mayor," Robert said without preamble. "She wants to meet first thing in the morning. The governor's office has also reached out. This is going big, Marcus. Bigger than just Milfield." "Good," Marcus said simply. "It should be big. It needs to be big. One officer, one department, one city, that's not enough. This needs to be the case that changes things nationally." "The FBI director wants to speak with you too," Robert added. "And Marcus, Internal Affairs just finished reviewing the store footage. It's worse than we thought. Wilson had his hand on his weapon before he even spoke to you. He was ready to escalate from the moment he saw you." Marcus wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed still hit hard. "Premeditation of prejudice," he said quietly. "That's one way to put it," Robert agreed. "My press conference is at 9 a.m. Will you be there?" "I'll be there," Marcus confirmed. "Robert, thank you for coming immediately, for taking this seriously, for not trying to cover it up or minimize it." "You don't thank someone for doing what's right," Robert replied. "You just expect it. That's the world we're trying to build, isn't it? Where doing the right thing is the expectation, not the exception." After they hung up, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of the evening, the fear. When Wilson's gun had been pointed at him, the humiliation of being forced to his knees, The rage at being treated like a criminal in a place where he'd shopped for years. The exhaustion of having to be perfect, calm and controlled, even while his rights were being violated. But alongside those feelings was something else, hope. Because tomorrow, Officer Wilson would face justice. Tomorrow, the world would see what had happened. Tomorrow, change would begin. Marcus Reynolds had walked into Westfield Grocery, just wanting ingredients for dinner. He was walking out as the catalyst for a revolution in policing that would ripple across the nation. It wasn't the evening he'd planned, but it might just be the evening that changed everything. The security footage would show it all, the mundane becoming momentous, the personal becoming political, a simple grocery run becoming ground zero for a fight about who belonged, who mattered, and who got to decide. And at the center of it all, a black FBI agent who refused to let his dignity be taken even when he was forced to his knees. Tomorrow, the world would see. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. But tonight, Marcus Reynolds sat in his apartment, still hungry, still processing, still preparing for the battle ahead. The pasta ingredients sat unused in his kitchen, a reminder of the normal evening that had been stolen from him. But they also represented something else, the right to simply exist, to shop, to live without fear or suspicion. That was what this fight was about. Not special treatment, not advantages, just the basic human right to buy groceries without ending up at gunpoint. It seemed like such a small thing to ask for, but as tonight had proven, it was still too much for some people to grant. But change was coming. Marcus could feel it in the air, see it in the messages flooding his phone, hear it in the outrage of witnesses who'd refused to stay silent. Officer Travis Wilson had thought he was confronting just another black man who didn't belong. Instead, he'd ignited a firestorm that would consume his career and potentially transform American policing. The groceries would have to wait. There was too much work to be done. The morning came too quickly. Marcus's phone vibrating off his nightstand at 5:47 a.m. with calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his personal number. He let them go to voicemail, knowing that everything he said needed to be calculated, purposeful. The video from Westfield Grocery had exploded overnight, 3 million views, and climbing trending on every social media platform, dissected on late-night news programs he hadn't even known were still on the air. He dressed carefully for the press conference, choosing his Navy suit, the one his sister had bought him when he'd been promoted to special agent in charge of the Civil Rights Unit. Every choice mattered now, too formal, and he'd seem elitist, too casual, and they'd say he wasn't taking it seriously. The red marks on his wrists had darkened to bruises overnight, purple-black reminders of Wilson's handcuffs. He considered covering them with his sleeves, then decided against it. Let them see. The federal building's parking garage was already swarming with media vans when he arrived at 7:30. Marcus slipped in through the secure entrance, grateful for the momentary quiet of his office. But even here, the weight of what was happening pressed in. His desk phone had 47 messages. His email inbox showed over 300 unread. His assistant Janet, who never came in before 9, was already at her desk, fielding calls with the efficiency of someone who'd been through media storms before. "The director wants to see you," she said without preamble. "And Special Agent Chen from Public Affairs is here with talking points, but I told her you don't need anyone telling you how to speak your truth." Marcus almost smiled. Janet had been with him for 6 years, had seen him through some of the worst civil rights cases in the country. She knew him well enough to know that scripted responses would only dilute the power of what needed to be said. Director Patricia Thornton was waiting in her office, standing at the window that overlooked downtown Milfield. She was a small woman who commanded enormous presence, her silver hair pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn for the 20 years Marcus had known her. She'd been his mentor at Quantico, had personally requested him for the Civil Rights Division had fought for resources and support when everyone else wanted to look away from the uncomfortable truths they uncovered. "I've been fielding calls since 4 a.m., she said without turning around. "The Attorney General wants a full investigation. The President's advisors are drafting a statement. And every civil rights organization in the country wants to know what we're going to do about this." "What are we going to do about this?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Patricia finally turned her dark eyes sharp with the anger she rarely let show. "We're going to burn it down," she said simply. "Not just Wilson, not just Milfield PD, the whole rotten system that lets officers like him think they can act with impunity. I've already got a team pulling every complaint, every use of force report, every internal investigation from the past 5 years. If there's a pattern, and we both know there is, we're going to expose it." She moved to her desk, pulled out a file that was already thick with documents. "Wilson's just the tip of the iceberg. 3 other officers from his training class have multiple excessive force complaints. His training officer, Sergeant Dale Mitchell, has been sued 4 times for civil rights violations, all settled out of court with NDAs. The department's had 17 complaints of racial profiling in the last year alone, all dismissed by internal review." "They knew," Marcus said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "They knew," Patricia confirmed. "And they did nothing, which makes them complicit." She paused, studying him with the intensity that had made her legendary in interrogation rooms. "Are you ready for this? Once we open this investigation officially, you become the face of it. Every racist with an internet connection will come after you. Death threats, doxing, the whole playbook." "They've been coming after me my whole life," Marcus replied. "The only difference is now they'll know my name." Patricia nodded, satisfied with his response. "The press conference is in an hour. Robert Jackson is a good man, one of the few police chiefs I actually trust. He wants real change, but he's going to need our backing to get it. The union's already mobilizing, claiming Wilson was a good cop who made an honest mistake." "An honest mistake," Marcus repeated, tasting the bitterness of the words. "Is that what they're calling it when you pull a gun on an innocent man?" "That's what they always call it," Patricia said. "Right up until the video proves otherwise. Speaking of which, we've had the tech team enhance the footage. You need to see this." She turned her computer monitor toward him, pulled up a video file. It was the security footage from the grocery store, but enhanced, zoomed in on Wilson's face. Patricia played it in slow motion, and Marcus watched Wilson's expression change the moment he'd walked into the store. It wasn't just suspicion, it was anticipation, almost excitement, like a hunter who'd spotted prey. "He was looking for a confrontation," Marcus observed. "More than that," Patricia said, clicking to another file. "This is Wilson's social media activity from the past year. Private accounts he thought were hidden, but nothing's really hidden from our cyber team." The screen filled with posts that made Marcus's stomach turn. Racist memes, comments about thugs and welfare queens, shared articles from white supremacist websites with approving comments, photos from what looked like militia training exercises, a whole digital footprint of hate that the Milfield Police Department had either missed or ignored. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "It gets worse," Patricia continued. 3 weeks ago he posted in a private forum about wanting to, and I quote, "catch one of these uppity ones who think they're better than us." The next day he requested a transfer to patrol the Westfield area specifically. He was hunting, Marcus said, the full horror of it settling in. He transferred to that neighborhood to hunt successful black people. "And he found you," Patricia finished. "The question is, was this his first attempt, or just the first one that got caught on camera?" Before Marcus could respond, Janet knocked and entered. "Chief Jackson is here. He says it's urgent." Robert entered looking like he hadn't slept, his usually immaculate uniform slightly rumpled. The confidence he'd shown last night had been replaced with something harder to read. Not defeat exactly, but the weariness of someone who'd just realized how deep the rot went. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The union's not just defending Wilson. They're threatening a walkout if any charges are filed. I've got officers openly saying they'll refuse to respond to calls in certain neighborhoods. And someone leaked Marcus's home address online." Patricia was already reaching for her phone. "I'll have a protection detail at your apartment within the hour," she told Marcus. "That's not the worst of it," Robert continued. "I've been going through Wilson's reports from the past year, cross-referencing with complaints that were dismissed. There are at least 6 other incidents that match this pattern. Black men, professional appearance, stopped for suspicious behavior in predominantly white neighborhoods. All of them ended with the men being too intimidated to file formal complaints." "Names?" Marcus asked. Robert handed him a list. Marcus recognized 2 of them, a doctor from the hospital where his sister worked, and incredibly, a city councilman's son who'd just graduated from law school. "Dr. James Washington," Marcus read. "He was stopped 4 blocks from the hospital where he's head of cardiology. Wilson made him sit on the curb for 40 minutes while he verified his identity." "And he never filed a complaint because," Patricia asked. "Because he knew nothing would come of it," Robert answered. "Because he had surgery in the morning and couldn't afford to spend days fighting a system designed to protect officers like Wilson. Because he was afraid it would somehow get worse if he spoke up." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of all those unheard voices, all those swallowed indignities pressing down on them. "Not anymore," Marcus said firmly. "We bring them all forward. Every single person Wilson harassed, profiled, or humiliated. We give them a voice, a platform, justice." Robert nodded slowly. "I've already reached out to Dr. Washington. He's willing to speak at the press conference if you are." "The union will go ballistic," Patricia warned. "Let them," Robert said with sudden fire. "I'm done pretending this is about a few bad apples. The whole damn orchard is diseased. If they want to walk out, let them. I'll bring in the National Guard if I have to. I will not have officers under my command who think their badge gives them the right to terrorize citizens based on the color of their skin." Marcus felt a surge of respect for his old friend. It was one thing to stand against injustice when you were the victim, another entirely to risk your career, your reputation, your entire department to do what was right. "There's something else," Robert said, his voice dropping. "Last night, after everything went down, I had Officer Chen pull Wilson's patrol car footage. Marcus, he followed you for 3 blocks before you got to the store. You didn't notice because you were on the phone, but he was tailing you, running your plates, looking for any excuse to make the stop." The violation felt fresh all over again. Marcus had thought the confrontation had been random, a wrong place, wrong time situation. But no, he'd been stalked, hunted, targeted. "We need that footage," Patricia said immediately. "Already copied and in evidence," Robert confirmed. "Along with something else. Wilson's partner, Officer Daniels, was supposed to be with him last night. But Wilson told him to take a break, said he'd handle the patrol solo for an hour. Daniels is willing to testify that Wilson specifically said he wanted to check out the neighborhood, see who doesn't belong. He'll be crucified by the other officers, Marcus pointed out. Maybe, Robert agreed. But Daniels is a good cop, a real one. 20-year veteran, never had a single complaint. He's sick of covering for assholes like Wilson. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I didn't become a cop to watch my partners hunt American citizens for sport." Janet knocked again. It's 8:45, the press is assembled, and there are protesters gathering outside, both supporting Agent Reynolds and supporting Officer Wilson. Marcus straightened his tie, and looked at his reflection in Patricia's office window. The man looking back at him was tired, but determined, bruised, but not broken. He thought about all the black men who'd been in his position, but without his credentials, his connections, his ability to fight back. This was for them. "Let's go make history," Patricia said, standing as well. The walk to the press conference felt both endless and too short. Marcus could hear the crowd before he saw them, the buzz of conversation, the shouted questions, the click of cameras. When they entered the conference room, it was standing room only. Local media, national outlets, international correspondents, who'd been in town covering another story and pivoted to this one. The air was electric with anticipation. Chief Jackson was already at the podium, his presence commanding, even in the chaos. He waited for the room to settle, then began without preamble. "Last night, one of my officers violated the oath he took to protect and serve. Officer Travis Wilson detained, threatened, and humiliated a federal agent whose only crime was shopping while black. This is not acceptable. This will not be tolerated, and this will result in immediate and severe consequences." The room erupted with questions, but Robert held up his hand for silence. "Officer Wilson has been suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Based on the evidence already gathered, including video footage, witness statements, and a pattern of similar behavior, I will be recommending to the prosecutor that criminal charges be filed, including assault with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights under color of law." The union representatives in the back of the room stood up shouting objections, but Robert continued over them. "Furthermore, effective immediately, the Milfield Police Department will undergo a complete review by the Department of Justice. Every officer will be retrained in constitutional policing, implicit bias, and de-escalation tactics. Any officer who refuses this training will be terminated." Now the room was in chaos. Half the reporters were shouting questions while the other half were already on their phones calling in the breaking news. Marcus saw two uniformed officers near the door exchange dark looks and leave. Robert stepped back from the podium. "I want to introduce Special Agent Marcus Reynolds, the victim of last night's assault, and a 15-year veteran of the FBI, who has dedicated his career to investigating civil rights violations." Marcus moved to the podium, the room falling silent again. He could feel every eye on him, every camera pointed his way. He thought about the script public affairs had prepared, full of carefully worded statements designed to minimize controversy. Then he thought about Dr. Washington, sitting on a curb like a criminal, about the young cashier Deshawn who'd watched him be humiliated and seen his own future, about every black parent who had to have the talk with their children about how to survive an encounter with police. "My name is Marcus Reynolds." He began, his voice steady and clear. "I am a federal agent. I am a law school graduate. I am a 15-year veteran of law enforcement. And last night, none of that mattered because Officer Travis Wilson saw my skin color and decided I was a threat." He held up his wrists, showing the bruises from the handcuffs. Several cameras zoomed in, and he knew the image would be on front pages tomorrow. Officer Wilson didn't make a mistake. He made a choice to follow me for 3 blocks, a choice to confront me without cause, a choice to draw his weapon on an unarmed man, a choice to force me to my knees in a place where I've shopped for years, where people know me, where I thought I was safe. His voice grew stronger, filled with the righteous anger he'd kept controlled for so long. "But this isn't about me. It's about the countless others who've faced the same treatment, but didn't have federal credentials to flash. It's about the men and women who've been humiliated, brutalized, and killed by those sworn to protect them. It's about a system that allows officers like Wilson to accumulate complaints without consequence, to harbor documented racial animus without review, to hunt black citizens like sport without fear of repercussion. The union representatives tried to interrupt again, but Marcus's voice rose above them. To those officers who claim this is an attack on all police, I say this. If you see yourself in Travis Wilson, if you think his actions were justified, if you believe that black skin is probable cause, then yes, this is about you. But to the good officers, the ones who honor their oath, who protect and serve all citizens equally, who are as disgusted by Wilson's actions as we are, this is your moment to stand up, to speak out, to help us clean house. He paused, letting his words sink in, then continued. The Department of Justice will be conducting a full investigation, not just into last night's incident, but into the pattern of discrimination and abuse that allowed it to happen. We will be interviewing every person who's been stopped, harassed, or profiled. We will be reviewing every complaint that was dismissed, every investigation that was buried, every warning sign that was ignored. And we will hold accountable not just Officer Wilson, but everyone who enabled him. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Agent Reynolds, what do you say to those who argue you should have just complied immediately and avoided the whole situation? Marcus had expected this question, had heard it 1,000 times in various forms. I did comply. I followed every lawful order, even the unlawful ones. I got on my knees. I allowed myself to be handcuffed. I laid on that floor while Officer Wilson decided whether my life was worth taking. If that's not compliance, what is? Should I have thanked him for not shooting me? Should I have apologized for existing in his presence? Another reporter. The police union says this is a rush to judgment, that Officer Wilson deserves due process. Officer Wilson will receive more due process than he gave me, Marcus replied. He'll have a lawyer, a trial, the presumption of innocence, all things he denied me when he decided I was guilty of something the moment he saw me. But due process doesn't mean escaping consequences. The video doesn't lie. The witnesses don't lie. His own social media posts don't lie. Travis Wilson is a racist with a badge, and it's time we stopped pretending otherwise. The union representative finally managed to shout loud enough to be heard, "This is a witch hunt, one mistake, and you want to destroy a good officer's life." Marcus turned to face him directly. A mistake is forgetting to signal when you change lanes. A mistake is putting salt in your coffee instead of sugar. Following an innocent man for 3 blocks, pulling a gun on him, forcing him to the ground, and keeping him in handcuffs, even after seeing federal credentials, isn't a mistake, it's a crime. And if Officer Wilson's life is destroyed, it won't be because of what I've done. It will be because of what he did in full view of cameras and witnesses with malice and prejudice. Dr. Washington had been standing to the side, and now Robert invited him to speak. The distinguished doctor, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his bearing dignified despite what he'd endured, approached the podium. 6 weeks ago, he began, his voice carrying the weight of exhausted patience. Officer Wilson stopped me 4 blocks from the hospital, where I've saved more lives than I can count. He made me sit on a curb like a common criminal while he verified my identity. When I told him I had surgery scheduled, he said, "Well, maybe you should have thought of that before you came to this neighborhood." I've performed surgery on police officers, saved their lives, and yet to Officer Wilson, I was just another black man who didn't belong. The room had gone quiet again, the weight of testimony from such a respected figure hitting home. I didn't file a complaint, Dr. Washington continued, because I was tired. Tired of fighting a system that protects the Travis Wilsons of the world. Tired of being told I'm overreacting, that I should be grateful it wasn't worse. But seeing what happened to Agent Reynolds, seeing Chief Jackson and Director Thornton take this seriously, I realized my silence was complicity. How many others have been silent? How many Travis Wilsons are out there enabled by our exhaustion? When Dr. Washington stepped back, Marcus returned to the podium for one final statement. Change starts today, he said firmly. Not tomorrow, not after committees and investigations and reports that gather dust. Today. Every officer who thinks like Wilson, who acts like Wilson, who's been protected like Wilson, your time is up. We're coming for your badges, your guns, and your power to terrorize with impunity. And to the communities who've suffered in silence, who've been told your experiences don't matter, who've been gaslit into thinking you're imagining the discrimination you face daily, we see you, we hear you, and we're going to fight for you. The press conference ended in a tsunami of questions, but Marcus was done talking. He'd said what needed to be said. Now came the harder work, the investigations, the legal battles, the long slog of systemic change. As he was escorted out through a secure exit, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another reporter, but something made him look. The message was simple. Thank you for standing up. My son was stopped by Wilson last month. Too scared to report it. Not anymore. A grateful father. Then another. Wilson pulled me over 6 times in 2 months. Said I was driving too nice a car for someone like me. I'm a software engineer, ready to testify. And another, my husband stopped jogging in our own neighborhood because of officers like Wilson. Today, he's going running again. By the time Marcus reached his office, he had dozens of similar messages. Each one a story of humiliation, fear, and injustice. Each one a person ready to speak truth to power. Janet was waiting with a stack of messages and a look of grim satisfaction. The Attorney General wants a full briefing by noon. The NAACP is offering full legal support. And Agent Reynolds' Officer Daniels is here. Says he has more information about Wilson that you need to hear. Officer Daniels was not what Marcus expected. A thin, bookish-looking man with thick glasses and nervous hands, he looked more like an accountant than a 20-year veteran cop. But his eyes were steady, determined. I've been Wilson's partner for 3 months, he began without preamble. Worst 3 months of my career. I've filed 2 complaints about his behavior, both buried by Sergeant Mitchell. I've got recordings. Marcus sat up straighter. Recordings? Daniels pulled out his personal phone. After my complaints went nowhere, I started recording our conversations in the patrol car. Legal in this state as long as one party consents. He pulled up an audio file. This is from last week. Wilson's voice filled the room, casual and poisonous. See that one probably dealing drugs? They all are, you know. Just haven't caught them yet. Give me 5 minutes alone with any of them. I'll find something. Or plant something. Know what I mean? Daniel's voice responded. That's illegal, Travis. Only if someone finds out. Wilson laughed. Besides, Mitchell's got my back. He taught me everything I know about handling these people. Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances. This was bigger than just Wilson. There's more, Daniel said, pulling up file after file. 6 hours of recordings over 3 months. Wilson talking about cleaning up the neighborhood, about putting them in their place, about how the chief was too soft and things were better in the old days when cops could really enforce the law. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Patricia asked. Daniels's shoulders slumped. Because I'm a coward. Because I have 2 kids and a mortgage. Because I told myself it was just talk. But when I saw that video last night, saw Agent Reynolds on the ground, I realized my silence made me complicit. My badge means nothing if I let it be tarnished by association with someone like Wilson. Marcus studied the man before him. It took courage to break the blue wall of silence, to risk everything to do what was right. We'll protect you, he said. Whistleblower protection, federal oversight. You did the right thing. Too late, Daniel said bitterly. But at least I'm doing it now. The rest of the morning blurred together phone calls with federal prosecutors, strategy sessions with Patricia's team, security briefings about the threats that were already pouring in. But through it all, Marcus kept thinking about the text messages, about all the people who'd suffered in silence, who'd been told their experiences weren't valid, who'd been gaslit into accepting the unacceptable. By noon, the protest outside had grown. On one side, Black Lives Matter activists and community members holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," and "How many more?" On the other, a smaller but vocal group of Wilson supporters, thin blue line flags waving, shouting about police being under attack. Marcus watched from his office window as the two groups faced off, separated by a line of state police. Robert had been true to his word about not using his own officers for crowd control, not trusting them to remain neutral. "It's starting," Patricia said, joining him at the window. "The real fight. Not just about Wilson, but about what kind of country we want to be." She was right. The battle lines were drawn now, not just in Milfield, but across the nation as the story continued to spread. Grocery store. While Black was trending globally, news outlets were running non-stop coverage. Op-ed writers were churning out pieces about systemic racism, police reform, and the two Americas that existed depending on your skin color. But Marcus knew the real battle wouldn't be fought in headlines or hashtags. It would be fought in courtrooms and city councils, in police academies, and community meetings, in the millions of small interactions between police and citizens that happened every day. His phone rang. Robert's name on the screen. "We've got a problem," Robert said without preamble. "Mitchell just called a meeting of all patrol officers. He's telling them not to cooperate with the federal investigation, that it's an attack on all cops. And Marcus, he's got Wilson's body camera footage from last night." "I thought Wilson's camera was off." "So did I. But Mitchell had him wearing a personal camera off the books. And whatever's on it, Mitchell's using it to rally the troops. He's showing it to officers right now, claiming it proves Wilson was justified." Marcus felt his blood run cold. What could possibly be on that footage that Mitchell thought would help Wilson? "I'm heading there now," Robert continued. "But Marcus, be ready. Mitchell's going to release that footage to the media, try to control the narrative. Whatever's on it, we need to be prepared to respond." As Marcus hung up, he realized this was far from over. Wilson might be suspended, might face charges, but the system that created him was fighting back. Sergeant Mitchell, with his 4 settled lawsuits and his protection of racist officers, wasn't going down without a fight. Patricia was already on her phone calling the tech team. "We need to be ready for a disinformation campaign. If they doctor that footage, if they selectively edit it, we need to be able to prove it." Outside, the crowds were growing larger, louder. The state police line was holding, but tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here, the little boy in Birmingham, who'd watched his father get pulled over for driving, while Black, the law student, who'd believed the system could be changed from within, the FBI agent, who'd dedicated his career to justice. All of it had led to this moment, this fight, this chance to make real change. His phone buzzed with another message, this one from Deshawn, the teenage cashier from the grocery store. "Watching the news in my civics class. Teachers using what happened to you to teach us about civil rights. You're in our history books already, Agent Reynolds. Don't let us down." Marcus smiled grimly. No pressure, just the weight of history and the hopes of millions. Janet knocked and entered. "Chief Jackson's on line 1, says it's urgent." Marcus picked up the phone, bracing himself for whatever came next. The fight was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Robert's voice crackled through the phone with an urgency that made Marcus's stomach clench. "Mitchell's footage shows something we missed. Before you entered the store, there was a black man who robbed the liquor store 2 blocks away. Similar height, similar build, wearing a suit. Mitchell's trying to claim Wilson had reasonable suspicion based on a suspect description. Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. This changed everything. Not the truth of what happened, but the narrative, the public perception, the legal complexity. When did this robbery happen? 40 minutes before you got to the grocery store. But here's the thing, the suspect was described as wearing a blue suit, not charcoal gray like yours. He was in his 20s, not 40s, and he had facial tattoos. Mitchell's conveniently leaving those details out when he shows the footage to the officers. Patricia, who had been listening on speaker, was already pulling up files on her computer. We need that full description from dispatch. Every detail, every timestamp. If Mitchell's manipulating evidence to justify Wilson's actions, that's obstruction of justice. Through his office window, Marcus could see the crowd outside growing more agitated. Someone had already leaked Mitchell's claim to the protesters supporting Wilson, and they were waving signs that read, "Reynolds was a suspect, and Wilson was right." "Robert, how many officers are backing Mitchell?" Marcus asked. There was a pause, then Robert's tired voice. "More than I'd hoped. Maybe 30–40%. The young ones mostly, and the ones who've been here since the bad old days. They're scared, Marcus. Scared that if Wilson goes down for this, they're next." "Maybe they should be scared," Patricia said coldly. "If they've been acting like Wilson, they should be terrified." A knock at the door interrupted them. Janet entered with a tablet, her face grim. "You need to see this. Mitchell's body cam footage just got leaked to Fox News. They're running it now." On the screen, grainy footage showed a figure in a blue suit running from a liquor store, a bag in his hand. The quality was poor, the face unclear, but the news anchor was already spinning the narrative. New footage raises questions about whether Officer Wilson had reasonable suspicion to stop Agent Reynolds. Marcus watched as the media machine began to churn, taking Mitchell's manipulated narrative and running with it. Within minutes, his phone was buzzing, with calls from reporters wanting his response to being a suspect. "We need to respond now," Patricia said, already typing on her phone, "before this narrative takes hold." But Marcus held up a hand, his mind working through the implications. "No. Let them run with it. Let Mitchell think he's winning." Robert's voice came through the phone, confused. "Marcus, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Mitchell just made a fatal mistake. He leaked evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. He manipulated that evidence to obstruct justice. And he did it all on camera in front of 40 witnesses." Marcus turned to Patricia. "How quickly can we get a warrant for Mitchell's electronics?" Patricia's smile was sharp. "Federal judge is standing by. Give me 10 minutes. As she made the call, Marcus watched the news coverage evolve. The split screen showed the liquor store footage next to his arrest video, pundits debating whether Wilson had acted reasonably. The protesters outside were getting louder, the two sides now actively confronting each other across the police line. Janet returned with another update. "Chief Jackson's here. Says he needs to speak with you immediately. And Agent Reynolds, your sister's online too. She sounds upset." Marcus took the call from his sister first, knowing she'd have seen the news. "Michelle, I'm okay." "No, you're not okay." His sister's voice was fierce with protective anger. "They're trying to make you into a criminal." "Marcus, I'm watching the news right now, and they're actually debating whether you might have robbed a liquor store." "Michelle, listen to me. The robbery suspect was 20 years younger than me, wearing a different colored suit with facial tattoos. Mitchell's desperate people make mistakes." "I don't care about Mitchell," Michelle said. "I care about my brother who had a gun pointed at him for buying pasta." "Mom's watching this from her nursing home, Marcus. She called me crying." That hit harder than anything else. Their mother, 83 years old, living with dementia, still aware enough to see her son being humiliated on national television. "I'll call her after this settles down," Marcus promised. "It better settle down with that racist bastard in prison," Michelle said. "And Marcus, I'm proud of you. Daddy would be proud too." Their father had been a freedom rider, had been beaten bloody on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, had spent his life fighting for civil rights, only to die of a heart attack the day before Barack Obama was elected president. Marcus carried his father's legacy like armor and burden both. After ending the call with Michelle, Marcus walked to the conference room where Robert was waiting. His friend looked haggard, his uniform disheveled in a way Marcus had never seen before. "I've lost control of my department," Robert said without preamble. "Mitchell's got them convinced this is a war on cops. He's telling them that if they don't stand together, they'll all be picked off one by one. And the union rep is backing him, saying any officer who cooperates with the federal investigation will lose union protection." "Then we take the union down too," Marcus said simply. Robert stared at him. "You can't take down the police union. They're too powerful, too entrenched." "Watch me," Marcus replied. "They want to obstruct a federal civil rights investigation. That's a federal crime. They want to protect racist cops. We'll RICO them like the organized crime syndicate they're acting like." Patricia entered the room, triumph on her face. "Got the warrant. FBI's executing it right now. Mitchell's house, his office, his patrol car, all his electronics. And here's the beautiful part, the idiot's been using his department email to coordinate with white supremacist groups. We've got enough to bury him." Robert's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his face darkening. "There's been an incident. 2 of my officers who spoke in support of you this morning just had their patrol cars vandalized in the station parking lot. Rat spray-painted on the windshields." "Pull them out," Marcus said immediately. "Federal protection, witness protection if necessary. Anyone who stands up for what's right gets our full support." The room's energy shifted as more FBI agents arrived, Patricia's team ready to take over the investigation. Marcus recognized several of them agents he'd worked with on civil rights cases across the country, professionals who understood the stakes. Special Agent Chen, the lead investigator, spread out a timeline on the conference table. "Here's what we've got. The liquor store robbery happened at 7:07 p.m. Suspect fled on foot, last seen heading east away from the grocery store. Wilson began following Agent Reynolds at 7:35 p.m., 3 blocks from the store. The grocery store is west of the liquor store, opposite direction from where the suspect fled. So there's no way Wilson could have reasonably thought I was the suspect," Marcus said. "It gets better," Chen continued. "Wilson's radio was on. He heard the full description, including the facial tattoos, the age, the blue suit. He acknowledged the transmission at 7:09 p.m. He knew exactly what the real suspect looked like, and he knew it wasn't you." Patricia's phone buzzed. She read the message, her eyes widening. "Mitchell's in custody. They found more than just emails. He had photos on his personal phone, photos of black residents with crosshairs drawn over their faces, including yours, Marcus, dated 2 weeks ago." The room went silent. This was no longer about one bad stop, one racist cop. This was about a conspiracy, a deliberate campaign of intimidation and harassment. "How deep does this go?" Robert asked, his voice hollow. "We're about to find out," Patricia replied. "Every officer Mitchell trained, every complaint he dismissed, every investigation he buried, we're going to examine all of it." Outside, the crowd had swelled to over 1,000 people. The morning's relatively peaceful protest had transformed into something more volatile. Marcus could see news vans from every major network, reporters doing live stand-ups with the federal building as backdrop. Janet knocked and entered again in her usual composure, cracking. "There's been a development," Officer Wilson just gave an interview to a conservative podcast. He's claiming he's being persecuted for doing his job, that Agent Reynolds is part of a deep state conspiracy to destroy local police departments. Marcus actually laughed, the absurdity of it hitting him. A deep state conspiracy? I was buying ingredients for carbonara. But Patricia wasn't laughing. This is their playbook. Turn the aggressor into the victim, claim persecution, rally the base. By tomorrow, Wilson will have a GoFundMe with 6 figures in donations from people who see him as a martyr. She was right. Within an hour, Wilson's interview had been shared thousands of times. Conservative commentators were calling him a hero, and the hashtag Stand with Wilson was trending. The narrative war was in full swing. Marcus's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. Agent Reynolds, this is Officer Sarah Kim. I was trained by Mitchell. I need to talk to someone. I have information about other incidents, other victims. But I'm scared. Mitchell has connections everywhere. Where are you now? Marcus asked, already signaling to Patricia. In my car outside the station. Other officers are watching me. They know I've been questioning things. Drive to the federal building. Come to the visitor's entrance. Federal agents will meet you and escort you in. You're under our protection now. 20 minutes later, Officer Kim sat in the conference room, her hands shaking as she laid out 3 years of witnessed abuses. Mitchell teaching new officers how to provoke suspects into resisting. Wilson bragging about making black drivers cry during traffic stops. A whole culture of racism dressed up as law enforcement. There's a group chat, she said, pulling out her phone. They call themselves the Warriors. About 15 officers. They share videos of their stops, compete to see who can be most aggressive without getting complained about. Wilson was trying to get promoted to their inner circle. She showed them the chat logs, and even Marcus, who'd seen the worst of humanity in his career, was sickened. Officers celebrating violence, sharing racist memes, planning coordinated harassment of black neighborhoods. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Robert asked, though his tone held no judgment, only sadness. I tried, Kim said quietly. I reported it to Internal Affairs. Sergeant Mitchell ran Internal Affairs. He told me if I ever mentioned it again, he'd make sure I had an accident on duty. The corruption went all the way through the department, like cancer. Robert put his head in his hands, the weight of his failure as chief crushing him. It's not your fault, Marcus told him. You've been here 6 months. This rot took years to develop. But it's my responsibility to fix it, Robert replied. And I don't know if it can be fixed. Maybe the whole department needs to be disbanded, rebuilt from scratch. Before anyone could respond, Janet burst in. You need to see this. Now. On the television, a breaking news alert. Officer Wilson's wife holding press conference. The screen showed a blonde woman, tears streaming down her face, 2 young children beside her. My husband is a good man, she was saying. He's being crucified for doing his job. Agent Reynolds is trying to destroy our family because Travis was just trying to keep the community safe. The optics were devastating. The crying wife, the innocent children, the narrative of a family man under attack. Marcus could feel public opinion shifting in real time. We need to respond, Patricia said. No, Marcus said firmly. We don't engage with theater. We engage with facts. How long until we have Mitchell's full electronic records analyzed? Another hour, maybe 2, Chen responded. Then we wait. Let them play their games. When we respond, it'll be with evidence so overwhelming that no amount of tears or rhetoric can refute it. But waiting was agony. The news cycle churned on Wilson's wife's tears, replayed endlessly, contrasted with images of Marcus and his FBI credentials, the narrative being crafted that this was about an elite federal agent persecuting a working-class cop. Dr. Washington called, his voice tight with anger. They're trying to make Wilson the victim. After what he did to you, to me, to how many others? The truth will come out. Marcus assured him, though he could hear the doubt creeping into his own voice. As the afternoon wore on, more officers came forward, emboldened by Kim's courage, each one with stories, evidence, recordings. The FBI's conference room became a confessional, cops unburdening themselves of years of witnessed abuses they'd been too frightened or complicit to report. One officer, a veteran named Thompson, provided the most damning evidence yet. "I've been recording everything for 2 years," he said, producing a hard drive. "Every illegal stop, every planted evidence, every brutality. I was building a case to take to the feds. When Robert became chief, thought maybe things would change. But Mitchell and his crew just got more careful, not less racist." The recordings were horrific. Wilson laughing about making an elderly black man soil himself during a traffic stop. Mitchell instructing officers on how to escalate situations to justify force. A whole system of oppression masquerading as law enforcement. "This is enough to prosecute half the department," Patricia said, reviewing the evidence. "Then that's what we do," Marcus replied. Robert stood up, decision made. "I'm calling a press conference for 6 p.m., and I'm requesting state police take over all patrol duties immediately. My department is compromised, and public safety has to come first." It was a stunning admission, a police chief essentially declaring his own department unfit for duty. But it was the right thing to do, and Marcus respected him more for it. As they prepared for the press conference, Marcus's phone rang. It was the Attorney General herself. "Agent Reynolds, I've been briefed on the situation. The President is prepared to make a statement supporting the investigation. But I need to know, how far are you prepared to take this?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "All the way. Every corrupt cop, every enabling administrator, every union official who obstructed justice. This ends here. You realize you're declaring war on one of the most powerful unions in the country. They have resources, political connections, an entire media apparatus. They also have 15 officers sharing videos of themselves committing civil rights violations," Marcus countered. "They have a sergeant who kept photos of black citizens with crosshairs on them. They have a pattern of corruption so blatant that even their sympathizers won't be able to defend it once it's all public." There was a pause then. "You have the full backing of the Justice Department. Whatever you need." As the 6 o'clock hour approached, the federal building was surrounded. The crowd had grown to several thousand, with more arriving every minute. State police had set up barricades, preparing for potential violence. Marcus stood at the window, watching the sea of faces below. Some angry, some hopeful, all waiting for something: justice, vindication, or conflict. He thought about his father, about the crowds he'd faced in Birmingham, and Selma, about how the fight never really ended, just shifted to new battlegrounds. Patricia joined him. "Chen's team just finished analyzing Mitchell's files. Marcus, you need to see this." On her tablet was a document titled Operation Clean Streets. It outlined a systematic plan to drive black families out of certain neighborhoods through targeted harassment, excessive fines, and arrests. Wilson's name was all over it, along with a dozen other officers. "This is ethnic cleansing," Marcus said, his voice hollow with shock. "It's also conspiracy to violate civil rights, racketeering, and about 15 other federal crimes," Patricia added. "We have enough to take down not just Wilson and Mitchell, but potentially the entire command structure that allowed this to happen." The press conference room was packed beyond capacity. Robert stood at the podium, Marcus beside him, Patricia on the other side. The air was electric with tension. Robert began without preamble, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "Today I am announcing that the Milfield Police Department is under federal receivership. Evidence has been uncovered of systematic corruption, civil rights violations, and criminal conspiracy within the ranks. Sergeant Dale Mitchell has been arrested on federal charges, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions, phones ringing, cameras flashing. Robert continued over the chaos. Furthermore, based on evidence collected today, 15 additional officers are being placed on administrative leave pending criminal investigation. The state police will assume all patrol duties effective immediately, and I am announcing my intention to resign as chief once the transition is complete, as I have failed in my duty to protect this community from those who were supposed to serve it. Marcus stepped to the podium as Robert stepped back. The room quieted slightly, waiting. The evidence we've uncovered today shows that what happened to me was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of racial harassment designed to intimidate and drive out black residents from certain neighborhoods. Officer Wilson was not a good cop who made a mistake. He was a willing participant in a criminal conspiracy. He held up a printed email from Mitchell to Wilson, dated a week before the grocery store incident. Quote, "Focus on the Westfield area. Too many of them moving in. Make them uncomfortable. Make them leave." This was not about fighting crime. This was about enforcing racial segregation through terror. A reporter from Fox News stood up. "What about Wilson's wife and children? They're receiving death threats. How do you justify destroying this family?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I don't celebrate any family's pain. But Officer Wilson's children are going home tonight. They'll see their father again. Can Breonna Taylor's family say the same? Can Tamir Rice's? Can any of the families destroyed by police violence say the same? Wilson's family is suffering the consequences of his choices. The families of police victims suffer for no choice of their own." Another reporter. "The police union is calling this a witch hunt, saying you're using your federal position for personal revenge." "The police union," Marcus replied, "has been notified that they are under federal investigation for obstruction of justice and potential RICO violations. Any statement they make should be considered in that context." The press conference continued for another 30 minutes, each revelation more damning than the last. The chat logs where officers competed to see who could generate the most complaints from black residents without facing discipline. The map Mitchell had created marking homes of prominent black families, with notes about how to harass them. The slush fund they'd created from civil asset forfeiture, specifically targeting black-owned businesses. By the time it ended, the narrative had shifted completely. Wilson was no longer a persecuted hero, but a confirmed participant in a racist conspiracy. Mitchell wasn't a tough sergeant, but a criminal mastermind. The Milfield Police Department wasn't under attack. It was under investigation for operating as a criminal organization. As they left the press conference, Marcus's phone was buzzing non-stop. Congratulations from civil rights leaders, interview requests from every major network, death threats from anonymous numbers. He ignored them all. In the quiet of Robert's office afterward, the three of them sat in exhausted silence. They'd won the day, but the war was far from over. The union would fight back, political allies of the police would mobilize, and the officers who'd been exposed would become martyrs to those who saw any accountability as persecution. "What happens now?" Robert asked. "Now we build something better," Marcus replied. "We use this as a model for reform nationwide. Every department gets scrutinized, every complaint gets investigated, every officer gets properly trained or removed." "That's going to take years," Patricia observed. "Then we'd better get started," Marcus said. Outside, the crowds were still growing. But something had changed. The two sides weren't shouting at each other as much. Some were actually talking the revelations of the day, forcing even Wilson's supporters to confront uncomfortable truths. Deshawn, the young cashier, had somehow gotten into the building and found Marcus. Agent Reynolds, I just wanted to say, what you did today, standing up there telling the truth even when they tried to make you the bad guy, that matters. My little brother watched it with me. He said he wants to be like you when he grows up. Tell him the goal isn't to be like me, Marcus replied. The goal is to create a world where he doesn't have to be twice as good just to be seen as equal, where he can go shopping without fear, where his skin color isn't seen as a threat. As night fell over Milfield, the federal building became a fortress of light in the darkness. Inside, agents worked through the night-building cases that would reshape American policing. Outside, the crowds slowly dispersed, but the conversation continued in homes, in bars, in churches, in the spaces where real change begins. Marcus stood at his office window one last time before heading home, looking out at the city that had become ground zero for a new chapter in the civil rights movement. He thought about Officer Wilson sitting in federal custody, his career and reputation destroyed. He thought about Mitchell facing decades in prison for crimes he'd thought his badge would protect him from committing. He thought about the good officers like Kim and Thompson, who'd finally found the courage to speak truth to power. But mostly, he thought about tomorrow, about the next young black man who would walk into a grocery store. Would he be able to shop in peace? Would he be seen as a customer rather than a criminal? Would the events of these past days create real change? Or would they be just another moment of outrage that faded into complacency? His phone buzzed with one last message of the day. It was from his mother's nursing home. The aide had helped her record a voice message. "Baby, I saw you on the TV. You looked just like your daddy up there speaking truth. I'm proud of you. We've come so far, but Lord knows we've still got miles to go. You keep walking, baby. Keep walking." Marcus saved the message, knowing he'd need to hear it again in the dark days ahead. Because this victory, as significant as it was just one battle in a war that had been raging for centuries. Wilson was done, Mitchell was finished, but there were thousands more like them hiding behind badges and qualified immunity, waiting for the attention to shift elsewhere so they could continue their reign of terror. But something had shifted in Milfield. The blue wall of silence had cracked. Officers were coming forward. The community was awakening to its power. And Marcus Reynolds, who'd just wanted to buy groceries, had become the catalyst for a reckoning that was long overdue. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opponents, new battles. But tonight, for just this moment, justice had prevailed. A racist cop had been exposed, his enablers arrested, and a corrupt system had been dragged into the light. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until every citizen could walk free without fear, shop without suspicion, exist without apology. But it was a start. The morning after the press conference brought no respite. Marcus woke at 4 a.m. to find news vans already stationed outside his apartment building, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray dawn sky like mechanical prayers. His phone showed 247 missed calls and over 1,000 text messages. The video of Wilson forcing him to his knees had been viewed 47 million times across various platforms, becoming the most watched police encounter in American history. He made coffee in the darkness of his kitchen, avoiding the windows where photographers waited with telephoto lenses. The bruises on his wrists had deepened to purple-black, a painter's palette of abuse that his body wore like evidence. Every movement reminded him of those moments on the grocery store floor, the cold linoleum against his cheek, the weight of Wilson's knee on his back, the metallic click of handcuffs that had sounded like the closing of a trap. His secure FBI phone rang. Patricia's voice was tired but urgent. "We have a situation. Wilson's attorney is holding a press conference at 7 a.m. They're claiming to have exonerating evidence." What kind of evidence could they possibly have? Marcus asked, though he knew the answer didn't matter. In the court of public opinion, accusations carried weight regardless of their merit. They're being cagey, but our sources say they're going to claim you made threatening gestures before the video started rolling. They've apparently got a witness. Marcus set down his coffee cup, feeling the familiar weight of injustice settling on his shoulders. Even now, even with everything exposed, they were still trying to flip the narrative to make him the aggressor and Wilson the victim. "Who's the witness?" he asked. "Margaret Hamilton, 68 years old, longtime resident, and coincidentally Mitchell's cousin by marriage." Of course. The corruption ran through the town like veins through a body, connecting seemingly innocent people to the rotten core of the police department. Marcus wondered how many Margaret Hamiltons there were in Milfield, people who would lie to protect the system that made them feel safe, even if that safety came at the cost of others' lives. By 6:30 a.m., Marcus was in the federal building surrounded by his team. The war room they'd established looked like something out of a political thriller. Whiteboards covered with connections between officers, timelines of incidents, photographs of evidence. At the center was Wilson's photo, but spreading out from it like a spider web were dozens of other faces, other names, other crimes waiting to be exposed. Special Agent Chen had been working through the night, and exhaustion etched deep lines around his eyes. "We've identified 17 more incidents that match the pattern. Black professionals stopped, harassed, humiliated. 3 of them left Milfield afterwards, said they couldn't feel safe here anymore." "Ethnic cleansing," someone muttered, and the words hung in the air like an accusation against everyone who'd allowed it to happen. At exactly 7 a.m., Wilson's attorney appeared on screen. Marcus recognized him immediately. Thomas Brennan, high-profile, expensive, and known for defending police officers accused of excessive force. He stood at a podium decorated with American flags, Wilson's wife beside him still playing the grieving victim, though her tears seemed more practiced now, less genuine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to controlling narratives. "We're here today to present evidence that completely exonerates Officer Travis Wilson. Evidence that shows Agent Marcus Reynolds was aggressive, threatening, and that Officer Wilson showed remarkable restraint in a dangerous situation." The screen shifted to grainy cell phone footage clearly taken from across the street. It showed Marcus entering the store, but the angle and distance made it impossible to see details. Then, through some sort of enhancement that looked more like manipulation, a gesture Marcus had made reaching for his phone was frozen, circled, presented as reaching for a weapon. "Furthermore," Brennan continued, "we have a witness who saw Agent Reynolds make threatening statements before entering the store." Margaret Hamilton appeared on screen, her gray hair carefully styled, wearing a cross necklace that caught the light. "I heard him on his phone," she said, her voice trembling with practiced fear. "He was angry, saying something about taking care of business and showing them who's boss. I was frightened. When that nice Officer Wilson arrived, I felt safe again." Marcus watched this theater with a mixture of rage and admiration for the sheer audacity of it. They were constructing an alternate reality in real time, building a story that would give Wilson's supporters something to cling to, some way to avoid confronting the truth of what he'd done. Patricia was already on her phone. "Get me the actual audio from Marcus's phone records, and pull any security footage from businesses near Hamilton's supposed location." Within minutes, they had the truth. Marcus had been on the phone with his sister discussing their mother's medication schedule. The phrase, "taking care of business," had been about picking up her prescription. And Margaret Hamilton hadn't been anywhere near the grocery store. Traffic cameras showed her car at a restaurant 6 miles away at the time she claimed to have witnessed Marcus's threatening behavior. "She just committed perjury," Chen observed. "Federal offense, 5 years minimum." "Add her to the list," Marcus said grimly. The list of people facing federal charges had grown to 23 names, with more being added hourly as the investigation deepened. Robert arrived looking haggard but determined. He'd spent the night reviewing every personnel file, every complaint, every red flag that had been ignored during his predecessor's tenures. "I found something," he said, dropping a thick folder on the table. "Wilson wasn't supposed to be hired. He failed his psychological evaluation. Said he showed aggressive tendencies toward perceived authority challenges and racial bias indicators." But Mitchell pushed it through, overrode the psychologist's recommendation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Wilson had been identified as unfit before he ever put on a badge, but Mitchell had wanted him anyway. Wanted him precisely because of his aggressive tendencies and racial bias. "This changes everything," Patricia said. "This shows institutional knowledge of Wilson's unfitness. The city's liability just went through the roof." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Washington. "Watching Brennan's circus. Don't let them shake you. Truth is stronger than their lies." But was it, Marcus wondered as he watched social media split into camps? Wilson's supporters seizing on Hamilton's testimony as proof of conspiracy, while others dissected the obvious manipulation of the evidence. Truth might be stronger, but lies traveled faster, and in the modern media landscape, sometimes speed mattered more than accuracy. The mayor called an emergency city council meeting for noon. The entire council would vote on whether to support the federal takeover of the police department or to fight it. Political careers hung in the balance, and Marcus knew that for many of the council members, their decision would be based not on justice but on which way the political winds were blowing. By 10 a.m., demonstrations had begun forming throughout the city, not just at the federal building, but at the police station, City Hall, and notably at Westfield Grocery, which had become a shrine of sorts. People left flowers where Marcus had been forced to his knees, candles, signs reading "Never Again," and "Shop while black should not be a crime." Marcus decided to go there against Patricia's security concerns. He needed to see it to stand in that place again, to reclaim it from the trauma Wilson had tried to inscribe on it. The store was closed, its windows covered with messages of support and outrage in equal measure. The manager, a middle-aged man named Paul Chen, no relation to Agent Chen, was standing outside looking overwhelmed. "Agent Reynolds," he said, straightening when he saw Marcus. "I'm so sorry. I should have intervened. I should have done something." "You called 911, Marcus replied. "You provided the security footage without hesitation. You did what you could." "It wasn't enough," Paul said, and Marcus could hear the weight of guilt in his voice. "I've been the manager here for 15 years. Do you know how many times I've seen officers follow black customers through my store? How many times I've watched them get stopped in the parking lot for matching a description? And I never said anything, never filed a complaint, because I told myself it wasn't my business." "It's everyone's business now," Marcus said. A crowd had gathered, recognizing him. Some wanted to shake his hand, others to apologize for not intervening, still others to share their own stories of harassment and profiling. An elderly black man leaning heavily on a cane pushed through the crowd. "I'm Jerome Williams," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "Deacon at First Baptist, lived in Milfield for 73 years. Officer Wilson pulled me over 6 months ago, made me get out of my car in the rain, stand there while he searched it. Found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find. But he made me stand there for 40 minutes getting soaked, my arthritis screaming, just because he could." "Did you file a complaint?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer. What would have been the point, my word against his? Who would they believe? This was the real crime, Marcus thought. Not just the individual acts of harassment, but the system that made victims feel helpless, that convinced them their voices didn't matter, that taught them to accept injustice as inevitable. The crowd parted suddenly, and Marcus saw why. A group of uniformed officers was approaching, but not Milfield police. These were state troopers sent to maintain order. Their leader, Captain Lisa Martinez, nodded respectfully to Marcus. "Agent Reynolds, we're here to secure the area for the memorial service." "Memorial service?" Marcus asked. "The community's organizing one for tonight, for all the victims of police harassment who never got justice. The mayor's approved it, even promised to attend." Politics, Marcus thought. The mayor smelled which way the wind was blowing and wanted to be on the right side of history. But he'd take the support, regardless of its motivation. Back at the federal building, the city council meeting was being broadcast live. The council chambers were packed overflow crowds watching on screens in the lobby. One by one, citizens stood to testify their stories, forming a damning chorus of abuse and neglect. A black business owner described being stopped 12 times in 6 months while driving his Mercedes to work. A Latino teenager talked about being slammed against a wall for looking suspicious while walking home from school. A white woman surprisingly stood to say she'd witnessed Officer Wilson plant evidence during a traffic stop, but had been too frightened to report it until now. When Wilson's supporters tried to speak, defending him as a good cop unfairly persecuted, they were met with a wall of testimony that made their position increasingly untenable. How could they defend Wilson when witness after witness described patterns of abuse that he'd participated in? Councilwoman Patricia Hayes, a longtime police supporter, stood to speak, and the room fell silent. "I've spent my career backing the blue," she said slowly. "I believed that a few bad apples shouldn't taint the whole force. But what we've learned in the past 48 hours shows this isn't about bad apples, it's about a rotten orchard. I vote to support the federal takeover." One by one, the council members voted. When it was done, the vote was unanimous. Even those who'd initially opposed it couldn't stand against the tide of evidence and public opinion. Marcus watched from the federal building as the news spread. Wilson's supporters gathered outside the police station began to disperse. Some looked angry, others confused, but a few looked thoughtful, as if maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to question what they'd believed. That afternoon, more officers came forward. The trickle became a flood, 23 officers by day's end, each with stories of Mitchell's corruption, Wilson's racism, and a culture that rewarded aggression and punished compassion. Officer Kim, who'd been first to break ranks, had become something of a hero to the others, showing them it was possible to choose integrity over solidarity. One officer, a rookie named Jamie Thornton, just 6 months out of the academy, broke down crying as he described his training. "Mitchell told us that black men were inherently dangerous, that we should always approach them ready for violence. He said it was for our safety, but really he was teaching us to be afraid, and that fear made us dangerous." The young man's confession hit Marcus particularly hard. How many Jamie Thorntons were out there poisoned by their training before they ever had a chance to be good cops? As evening approached, preparations for the memorial service began. What had started as a small gathering had grown into something massive. The parking lot of Westfield Grocery had been transformed into an outdoor venue with a stage sound system and seating for hundreds, though thousands were expected to stand. Marcus stood backstage with Robert, both men looking out at the growing crowd. People of all races, ages, and backgrounds were gathering united in their demand for justice and change. "My father would have been proud to see this," Robert said quietly. He was a cop too back in Alabama during the civil rights era. One of the few black officers on the force. He used to tell me stories about trying to protect protesters while his white colleagues were beating them. Said the hardest part wasn't the danger, it was knowing he was part of a system that was fundamentally wrong. "Why did he stay?" Marcus asked. because he believed it could be changed from the inside, that good people could reform bad systems. I used to think he was naive. Now standing here watching this, maybe he was right. Maybe it just takes a moment like this, a catalyst, like what happened to you, to make that change possible. The service began as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful for the gravity of the occasion. Speakers took the stage one by one, victims of police harassment, family members of those killed by police violence officers who'd found the courage to speak out against corruption. Dr. Washington spoke eloquently about the dignity that had been stripped from him and so many others, and how reclaiming that dignity was not just about justice, but about humanity itself. When Officer Wilson made Agent Reynolds kneel, he said he thought he was demonstrating power. But all he showed was fear of a black man who stood tall, who knew his worth, who refused to be diminished. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Marcus could feel the power of the moment, the sense that something fundamental was shifting. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about generations of injustice finally being acknowledged, finally being challenged. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight. He thought about what to say, how to capture the magnitude of what had happened, and what still needed to happen. 3 days ago, he began, I walked into this store to buy pasta. I walked out as a symbol of something I never asked to be the face of a struggle that's been going on for longer than any of us have been alive. But if that's what I've become, then let me be clear about what this symbol represents. He paused, gathering his thoughts, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. This is not about revenge. This is not about hating police. This is about accountability. It's about a system that allows officers like Travis Wilson to terrorize communities with impunity. It's about departments that protect racists instead of citizens. It's about unions that prioritize solidarity over justice. And it's about all of us who've been silent for too long, who've looked away, who've told ourselves it wasn't our problem. The crowd was completely silent now, even the children sensing the gravity of the moment. Officer Wilson will face justice. Sergeant Mitchell will face justice. But that's not enough. We need systemic change. We need police departments that serve all citizens equally. We need training that emphasizes de-escalation over dominance. We need accountability that doesn't depend on cell phone videos and federal agents happening to be victims. He looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the event live. To every officer watching this, you have a choice. You can be part of the problem or part of the solution. You can stand with the Travis Wilsons of the world, or you can stand with justice. There is no middle ground anymore. As he spoke, his phone vibrated with a message from Patricia. Wilson just fired his attorney, wants to make a deal. Marcus felt no satisfaction at the news. Wilson's potential plea deal wouldn't undo the trauma, wouldn't erase the bruises, wouldn't give back the dignity he'd tried to steal. But it was a start. The service continued past midnight, becoming less formal and more communal. People shared stories, sang songs, prayed together regardless of faith. The parking lot of a grocery store had become sacred ground, transformed from a site of humiliation into a place of healing. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing with Robert and Patricia, the three of them exhausted, but somehow energized by what they'd witnessed. This is bigger than Milfield now, Patricia observed. The Attorney General called. They want to use this as a model for federal intervention in other departments with patterns of abuse. You've started something, Marcus. We've started something, Marcus corrected. All of us, every person who stood up, who spoke out, who refused to accept the unacceptable. A young woman approached them, hesitant but determined. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing a fast food uniform that suggested she'd come straight from work. Agent Reynolds, I'm Jasmine Torres. I work at the burger place next to the grocery store. I saw everything that night, but I was too scared to get involved. I've been feeling guilty ever since. Is there anything I can do now? Marcus thought about all the Jasmine Torreses in the world, people who wanted to help, but didn't know how, who felt guilty for their inaction, but were ready to act now. Yes, he said. Keep watching. Keep recording. Keep speaking up. The only way this changes is if we all refuse to look away anymore. As they walked back to their cars, Robert's phone rang. He answered, his face immediately tensing. There's been an incident. 3 officers just barricaded themselves in the station. They're saying they won't leave, that the federal takeover is illegal, that they're making a stand for real police. Marcus felt his exhaustion evaporate, replaced by cold determination. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it was entering a new, more dangerous phase. The officers who'd been exposed weren't going quietly. They were going to fight, and that fight could turn violent. How do you want to handle this? Patricia asked. Marcus looked back at the grocery store, at the candles still burning, where he'd been forced to kneel. We handle it the way we've handled everything else, with truth, with justice, and without backing down. The 3 of them headed toward the police station, knowing that the next few hours would be crucial. The officers barricaded inside weren't just making a stand for themselves, they were testing whether the federal government had the will to follow through on its promises of reform. As they drove through the dark streets of Milfield, Marcus could see lights on, in houses that should have been dark, televisions glowing with news coverage, families having conversations that had been avoided for too long. The city was awake, aware, and watching. The police station was surrounded by state troopers when they arrived, their vehicles forming a perimeter. Media vans lined the streets, reporters doing live shots, the drama playing out in real time for a national audience. Inside the station, the 3 barricaded officers had access to weapons communications equipment, and most importantly, records that investigators hadn't yet seized. They could destroy evidence, release confidential information, or worse, decide to go down fighting. Captain Martinez met them at the command post. They're demanding to speak with the union rep and their lawyer. They're saying they're political prisoners, that this is tyranny. Who are they, Robert asked. Martinez checked her notes. Officers Brad Hutchinson, Mike Torelli, and David Kim, no relation to Officer Sarah Kim, who testified today. Robert's face darkened. I know them. All 3 were trained by Mitchell. All 3 have multiple complaints. Hutchinson was suspended twice for excessive force, but reinstated both times by the union. They're probably destroying evidence right now, Patricia said urgently. Marcus stepped forward. Let me talk to them. Everyone turned to stare at him. Marcus, they're armed and desperate, Robert protested. You're the last person they want to see. Exactly, Marcus replied. I'm the face of everything they're fighting against. If I can walk in there unarmed and talk to them, it shows we're not afraid. It shows we're reasonable. And maybe, just maybe, it prevents bloodshed. The debate was brief but intense. Finally, Patricia made the call to her superiors and permission was granted. Marcus would go in wearing a wire with state troopers ready to breach if anything went wrong. As he prepared to enter the station, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a simple trip to buy groceries to negotiating with desperate cops in a standoff that the entire nation was watching. Life had a way of choosing your battles for you, and this battle had chosen him. He walked through the station's front door, hands visible, moving slowly. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows, making the familiar space seem alien. He could hear movement from the records room where the officers had barricaded themselves. Hutchinson, Torelli, Kim, he called out. This is Agent Marcus Reynolds. I'm unarmed and I'm here to talk. There was a long silence, then Hutchinson's voice, rough with stress and probably alcohol. "Come to gloat, federal boy. Come to see the local cops brought low." "I came to prevent anyone from getting hurt," Marcus replied, moving closer to their position. "Including you." "Bullshit," Torelli spat. "You came to destroy us. Well, we're not going down without a fight." Marcus could hear the fear beneath the bravado. These men had built their identities around their badges, their power, their place in a system that was now crumbling. They were terrified, and terrified people did desperate things. "You want to know something?" Marcus said, surprising himself with his honesty. "When Wilson had me on the ground, when he had his gun on me, I was terrified too. Not just of dying, but of becoming another statistic, another hashtag, another name on a list of victims. I understand fear. But what you're doing now, this isn't courage. It's just prolonging the inevitable." "You don't understand anything," Kim said, but his voice was less certain. "We were doing our jobs. We were protecting the community." "From whom?" Marcus asked. "From doctors like James Washington, from teenagers walking home from school, from me buying pasta. Who exactly were you protecting? And from what?" The silence stretched out heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Hutchinson spoke again. "If we come out, we're finished. Our careers, our lives, everything." "Your careers in law enforcement are finished regardless," Marcus said bluntly. "But your lives don't have to be. You can cooperate, testify about the culture Mitchell created, help us understand how it got this bad. You can be part of the solution instead of dying for a problem." He could hear them arguing among themselves, voices low but urgent. The wire transmitted everything to the command post outside, where negotiators analyzed every word, every tone, every sign of potential violence or surrender. "You want us to be rats," Torelli said finally. "I want you to be honest," Marcus replied. "For once in your careers, just be honest about what you've done, what you've seen, what you've been part of. The truth is going to come out anyway. The only question is whether you help reveal it or get buried by it." More arguing than the sound of items being moved. Marcus tensed, ready to dive for cover if necessary. But instead of gunfire, he heard the sound of the barricade being dismantled. "We want immunity," Hutchinson called out. "I can't promise that," Marcus said. "But I can promise that cooperation will be taken into consideration. And I can promise that if you come out peacefully, tonight doesn't have to end in tragedy." 20 minutes later, the three officers emerged, hands raised, weapons left behind. They were arrested quietly, without drama, the anticlimax somehow more powerful than any violent confrontation could have been. As they were led away, Hutchinson stopped near Marcus. "You really were just buying groceries, weren't you?" "Yeah," Marcus replied. "I really was." Hutchinson shook his head, something like understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "Wilson always was an idiot. But we all let him be one. We all let Mitchell make us into something we shouldn't have been." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, and that was more than Marcus had expected. The aftermath of the standoff brought an eerie quiet to Milfield as dawn broke over the city. Marcus hadn't slept in 36 hours, but adrenaline kept him sharp as he sat in the federal prosecutor's office watching as one by one the arrested officers were brought in for processing. Each face told a story of a system that had failed both the community it was supposed to protect and the officers it had corrupted. Wilson was the last to be brought in for his formal federal arraignment. Gone was the swagger Marcus had seen that night in the grocery store. The man who entered the courtroom looked diminished, his eyes darting nervously around the room, perhaps finally understanding that his badge could no longer protect him from the consequences of his actions. He wore an orange jumpsuit, now the uniform of accountability that he'd put so many innocent people in without cause. The federal prosecutor, Andrea Sullivan, was a force of nature Marcus had worked with before on civil rights cases. She approached the bench with the confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. "Your Honor, the United States is charging Travis Wilson with violation of civil rights under color of law assault, with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Given the evidence of premeditation and the systematic nature of these crimes, we're requesting no bail." Wilson's new attorney, a public defender named Michael Chen, who'd drawn the short straw, stood to argue. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record, has ties to the community." Your client, Judge Catherine Morrison, interrupted, her voice sharp as winter wind, participated in what federal investigators are calling a conspiracy of ethnic cleansing. He's on video forcing a federal agent to the ground at gunpoint for the crime of grocery shopping. The court has reviewed evidence that he stalked Agent Reynolds for 3 blocks before initiating contact. Bail is denied. As Wilson was led away, he looked back at Marcus, and for a moment their eyes met. Marcus expected to see hatred, defiance, maybe even threat. Instead, he saw something else, fear, certainly, but also a dawning recognition of what he'd thrown away. Wilson had had everything: a career, a family, respect in his community, and he'd destroyed it all for the satisfaction of humiliating people he saw as beneath him. The next hours blurred together as the legal machinery ground forward. Mitchell's arraignment was even more dramatic. The veteran sergeant had tried to maintain his authority, even in custody, barking orders at younger officers who were no longer obligated to listen. When the full list of charges was read, including racketeering, which could bring 20 years, his facade finally cracked. "This is a witch hunt," Mitchell shouted, his face red with rage. 40 years I gave to this city, 40 years keeping the streets safe." "Safe for whom?" Judge Morrison asked coldly. "The evidence shows you created a system where black residents were systematically harassed, where officers were trained to see certain citizens as enemies. You didn't keep the streets safe, Sergeant Mitchell. You made them a battleground." As the arraignments continued, Patricia pulled Marcus aside. "The Attorney General wants to speak with you, now." The video call connected to show Attorney General Elizabeth Harper in her Washington office, her expression grave. "Agent Reynolds, what you've uncovered in Milfield is being replicated in at least 17 other cities we've identified so far. We're looking at a potential national crisis of police corruption and civil rights violations." Marcus felt the weight of her words settling on his already exhausted shoulders. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to lead a task force. Full resources, hand-picked team authority to investigate any department showing similar patterns. The President is prepared to sign an executive order giving you unprecedented power to reform American policing." It was everything Marcus had fought for his entire career, the chance to make real systemic change. But he thought about the cost, the threats that would multiply the target on his back, that would grow even larger, the life he'd have to put on hold indefinitely. "Can I have some time to think about it?" he asked. 24 hours, Harper replied. "The President wants to announce this at a press conference tomorrow night." As the call ended, Marcus found himself standing at the window of the federal building looking out at Milfield. The city looked different somehow, as if the events of the past days had physically transformed it. Or maybe it was just that the veneer had been stripped away, revealing what had always been there. Robert joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Heard about the task force offer. You going to take it?" "Would you?" Marcus asked. Robert was quiet for a moment, then said, "My father once told me that the hardest battles aren't the ones where you face the enemy. They're the ones where you have to face your own people, tell them uncomfortable truths, force them to change. But those are also the most important battles. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. It was Deshawn, the young cashier from the grocery store. "Agent Reynolds, you need to see the news. Wilson's wife is on every channel." They turned on the television to find Miranda Wilson sitting in what looked like her living room, her two children absent this time. But this wasn't the tearful defender they'd seen before. Her expression was different, harder, more resolute. "I need to tell the truth," she began, and the interviewer looked surprised as if this wasn't what they'd discussed. "My husband, Travis, what he did was wrong. I've seen the videos, all of them. I've read the reports, and I knew. I knew about his views, his anger toward black people. I heard him use slurs at home, saw him celebrate when he'd put one in their place, as he called it." The interviewer recovered quickly. "Are you saying you knew about Officer Wilson's racist behavior?" Miranda's composure cracked slightly. "I told myself it was just talk, just frustration from a hard job. But deep down, yes, I knew. And I stayed silent. I benefited from his salary, from the respect being a cop's wife brought from feeling protected. But Agent Reynolds didn't feel protected that night, did he? He felt terrorized. By my husband. And I'm done pretending otherwise." Marcus watched stunned as Miranda Wilson continued her confession. She revealed conversations where Wilson had bragged about harassing black drivers, nights when he'd come home excited because he'd scared one good moth, the way he'd taught their children to be suspicious of black people in their neighborhood. "Why are you saying this now?" the interviewer asked. "Because my 7-year-old son asked me if Daddy was a bad guy," Miranda replied, tears finally coming. "And I couldn't lie to him anymore. I couldn't raise my children to think what their father did was acceptable. They deserve better. We all deserve better." The interview sent shockwaves through both camps. Wilson's supporters felt betrayed, their narrative of a persecuted hero crumbling with his own wife's testimony. Meanwhile, those calling for justice found unexpected validation from the most unlikely source. Within an hour, Miranda Wilson's confession had been viewed 10 million times. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, he found a message from Miranda herself. "I'm sorry it took me this long to speak up. My children and I are leaving Milfield tonight, starting over somewhere else. I hope someday you can forgive my silence." Marcus didn't respond immediately, unsure what to say to the woman who'd stood by, while her husband terrorized a community, but had finally found the courage to speak truth. Patricia entered the room with a stack of files. "We've got a problem. The police union just filed an injunction trying to block the federal takeover. They've got a judge in their pocket. Harold Fitzgerald. Old school, been on the bench for 30 years. He's agreed to hear arguments this afternoon." The courtroom was packed when they arrived, the air thick with tension, and the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. Judge Fitzgerald, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a portrait of 19th century jurists, surveyed the room with obvious displeasure at the federal presence. The union's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Jonathan Pierce, argued passionately that the federal takeover was unconstitutional, that it violated states' rights, that one incident, however regrettable, didn't justify dismantling an entire police force. "Your Honor," Pierce said, his voice resonating with practiced authority, "we're not here to defend Officer Wilson's actions, but to punish an entire department, to subject honest, hard-working officers to federal oversight because of one bad apple." "Objection," Andrea Sullivan interrupted. "The evidence shows this wasn't one bad apple, but a systematic pattern of corruption and civil rights violations." Judge Fitzgerald's gavel came down hard. "I'll hear from the federal prosecutor when it's her turn, Counselor." For 2 hours, the arguments went back and forth. Pierce painted a picture of federal overreach of Washington bureaucrats trying to control local law enforcement. Sullivan countered with evidence of corruption so deep and pervasive that only federal intervention could root it out. Then Marcus was called to testify. As he took the stand, he could feel the hostility from the union supporters in the gallery, but also the hope from community members who'd come to witness this moment. Agent Reynolds, Pierce began his cross-examination. Isn't it true that you've harbored a grudge against local law enforcement since childhood? No, Marcus replied calmly. I've harbored a desire for equal justice since childhood. There's a difference. But you've made a career out of investigating police departments, haven't you? Some might say you have an agenda. Marcus met his gaze steadily. My agenda is the Constitution of the United States, specifically the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under law. If that threatens certain police officers, perhaps they should examine why. Pierce tried another angle. The officers who've been arrested, they have families, children who depend on them. Doesn't that matter to you? Of course it matters, Marcus replied. Just as it mattered that Dr. Washington has patients who depend on him, yet Officer Wilson still forced him to sit on a curb like a criminal. Just as it matters that every black parent in this city has to have the talk with their children about how to survive a police encounter. Everyone's family matters, counselor. That's precisely the point. Judge Fitzgerald seemed unmoved by the testimony, his expression suggesting his mind was already made up. But then something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors opened, and a line of people entered, all wearing police uniforms. Officer Sarah Kim led them, followed by Officer Daniels, Officer Thompson, and 17 others. They stood at the back of the courtroom, their presence a silent but powerful statement. Your Honor, Sarah Kim said, we're active officers in the Milfield Police Department, and we support the federal takeover. We've seen the corruption, the racism, the abuse of power. We've tried to report it through proper channels and been ignored or threatened. Federal oversight isn't an attack on good cops. It's our only hope for becoming the police force this community deserves. The judge's expression shifted, the unity of the blue wall cracking before his eyes. Pierce looked stunned, unprepared for police officers to break ranks so publicly. After a recess, Judge Fitzgerald returned with his decision. His voice was reluctant, but clear. While this court has concerns about federal overreach, the evidence presented shows a pattern of constitutional violations that local authorities have been unable or unwilling to address. The motion for an injunction is denied. The courtroom erupted. Union supporters stormed out in anger, while community members embraced some, crying with relief. Marcus felt no celebration, only exhaustion, and the knowledge that this was just one battle in a much longer war. That evening, as the sun set over Milfield, Marcus stood in his hotel room. He couldn't go back to his apartment, yet not with the death threats still coming, and called his mother's nursing home. The aide put her on the phone, and for a moment, Marcus just listened to her breathing, the sound that had comforted him as a child. "Mama, it's me," he said softly. "I know who it is," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "My boy, who stands up to bullies just like his daddy taught him. I saw you on the TV again today. You looked tired, baby." "I am tired, Mama." "Good tired or bad tired?" Marcus thought about it. "Both, I think. Tired from fighting, but also tired of having to fight for things that should be basic human rights." "Your daddy used to say the same thing," she said. "After Selma, after Birmingham, after every march and beating and arrest. But you know what he also said? He said being tired was a luxury we couldn't afford. Not when there was still work to do." "The Attorney General wants me to lead a national task force," Marcus told her. "Take this fight across the country." There was a pause, then his mother said, "Of course she does. You've shown them what courage looks like. Question is, baby, do you have enough courage left for what comes next?" Before Marcus could answer, there was a knock at his door. Through the peephole, he saw Robert and Patricia both looking urgent. "Marcus, you need to see this," Patricia said as soon as he opened the door. She held up her tablet showing a video that had just gone viral. It was from a police body camera, but not from Milfield. The footage showed an officer in Chicago forcing a young black woman to the ground during a traffic stop, his knee on her neck, as she gasped that she couldn't breathe. The timestamp was from that morning, hours after Marcus's testimony had been broadcast nationally. "It's not just continuing," Robert said grimly. "It's escalating. Some officers see what's happening here as a threat, and they're responding with more violence, not less." Marcus watched the video, seeing the same pattern he'd experienced, the same abuse of power, the same assumption that a badge granted the right to terrorize. The young woman in the video looked terrified, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that would never fully leave her. "There are 3 more," Patricia said. "Philadelphia, Houston, and Seattle, all since yesterday. It's like they're testing us, seeing if we'll really follow through." Marcus's phone rang. It was the Attorney General. "Agent Reynolds, I'm sure you've seen the videos. The president is moving up the timeline. We need your answer now." Marcus looked at Robert and Patricia, at the videos of abuse playing on the tablet, at the sun setting over a city that would never be the same. He thought about his father, who'd fought this fight with his body in the streets. He thought about his mother aging in a nursing home, still believing change was possible. He thought about Deshawn, the young cashier who'd watched him be humiliated and needed to believe it meant something. "Yes," he said into the phone. "I'll do it." Harper's relief was audible. "Thank you. The president will announce it in an hour. Be ready for your life to change, Agent Reynolds." As if it hadn't already changed, Marcus thought. As if the moment Wilson had forced him to his knees hadn't transformed him from a man buying groceries into a symbol of resistance. The announcement came at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. President Catherine Walsh stood at the podium in the White House press room, her expression grave. "Today I'm announcing the formation of the National Police Reform Task Force to be led by FBI Special Agent Marcus Reynolds. This task force will have unprecedented authority to investigate and reform police departments showing patterns of civil rights violations. What happened in Milfield is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a disease that has infected too many of our law enforcement institutions. That disease ends now." Within minutes, Marcus's phone was buzzing nonstop. Media requests, death threats, messages of support, and offers of help flooded in. He turned it off, needing just a moment of quiet before the storm truly hit. Robert and Patricia sat with him in silence, understanding the weight of what he'd just accepted. Finally, Robert spoke. "You know they're going to come after you with everything they have. The unions, the politicians who depend on them, the officers who see you as a threat to their way of life." "I know," Marcus replied. "You know some departments will reform only on paper, that they'll find ways to continue the abuse more carefully," Patricia added. "I know. You know this could take years, maybe decades, and you might not live to see real change," Robert said. Marcus stood walking to the window where he could see the lights of Milfield spreading out before him. Somewhere out there, Wilson sat in a federal cell, contemplating the ruins of his life. Mitchell faced decades in prison for crimes he'd thought his badge made legal, and thousands of officers were watching, waiting, deciding whether to be part of the solution or part of the problem. "My father never saw a black president," Marcus said finally. "But he kept marching anyway. He never saw the Civil Rights Act enforced in his lifetime, but he kept fighting anyway." Change doesn't happen because we're guaranteed to see it completed. It happens because we're willing to start it, even knowing we might not finish it. He turned back to his friends, his exhaustion evident, but his determination clear. Tomorrow we start building something better. Not perfect, probably not even good enough, but better. And that's worth fighting for. As the night deepened over Milfield, the city that had become ground zero for a new chapter in American civil rights, Marcus Reynolds prepared for the fight of his life. He'd walked into a grocery store wanting dinner, and walked out carrying the hopes and fears of millions. The badge Wilson had tried to hide behind was now being transformed into a tool for justice. The knee that had held Marcus down had become the catalyst lifting up a movement. And the simple act of shopping while black had sparked a reckoning that would reshape American policing. The work ahead was monumental, the opposition fierce and the outcome uncertain. But as Marcus stood there surrounded by allies who'd chosen justice over comfort, he felt something his father must have felt all those years ago on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Not hope exactly, but determination. The determination to keep walking forward even when you couldn't see the other side. Wilson had forced him to his knees, but Marcus Reynolds had risen. And with him rose the possibility that maybe finally the promise of equal justice under law might become more than just words on paper. The journey from that grocery store floor to the White House announcement had been just 4 days, but it had changed everything. Now came the harder part, making sure that change lasted, that it spread, that it took root so deeply that no future Wilson could ever again terrorize citizens with impunity. It would take years, maybe generations, but it had begun here in Milfield with pasta and pancetta and a racist cop who'd picked the wrong person to humiliate. Justice Marcus reflected sometimes came from the most unexpected places, and sometimes it came from simply refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. The fight was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.